Welcome back to another episode of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell. Today is a new guest to the program. You may not know him by name, but you are likely familiar with some of the projects and mines that he has been key in developing. His name's Cameron McRae. Cameron, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Colin. Great to be on.
Cameron, thanks for joining us today from Ulaanbaatar, which I'll call UB throughout the rest of the interview, which is in Mongolia, of course. And you've had a number of executive roles in the copper sector during your previous 28-year career with Rio Tinto. This included your last role, which was being heavily involved with the largest expansion project currently taking place globally in the entire hard rock sector, which is, of course, the Oyu Tolgoi copper gold mine in Mongolia. I just want to get your take on the recent move in copper prices, which has investors in the sector quite excited.
Well, Colin, personally, I think the recent run-up in the price is overdue. When you look at the fundamentals for further growth in the medium to longer term price, I think these are justifiable. So I think you've seen a pickup from prices that, where the copper price really shouldn't have been, and I think you're going to see the copper price go higher and stay there for longer. That's on the back of absolute growth in copper demand, which will continue to be robust. And a rundown in existing reserves, and the demand supply balance as it currently sits is pretty finely tuned. Supply interruptions have no doubt had a positive effect on recent prices, but the copper sector has been spoilt for a number of years. We haven't seen supply disruptions for a while. The other factors that I believe will have a bullish impact on prices over the coming year are, firstly, unpredictability around what's happening with the Freeport-Grasberg mine. They've given some pretty aggressive guidance for the ramp up there, but there's a lot of uncertainties with what the Indonesian government are seeking to do with the ownership levels and what that might have on sort of the necessary capital that needs to go in to keep the mine running at a high level. We've seen some discussions from the Chinese government on scrap imports, and these have increased significantly. But the government are now talking about a ban on dirty copper scrap, which I think makes up about 80% of the scrap coming in. And if that ban comes to pass, I think you'll see that will apply pressure on copper concentrate. I'm told that grid-related spending in China is predicted to stay strong and grow. And, unfortunately, we've seen the destruction reached by Hurricane Irma in the US, and these sorts of events, seem to happen around the globe with regularity, and, that provides input into requiring additional copper.
Cameron, Oyu Tolgoi is a massive project. In fact, I believe the initial build ended up costing somewhere around $10 billion for the CapEx. Can you give our listeners an idea of what the size of that project is in the scheme of the global production picture?
Yeah, the phase one of the project, if you look at sort of all of the money that was spent before construction started, which was effectively expenditure over a 15-year period, was about $1 billion. And then a little bit over $6 billion was spent in phase one, building the open cut and all the supporting infrastructure and getting the underground started. So, probably about $7.5 billion was invested to get the copper mine into production and exporting into China. But even with that size of investment, that effectively makes up less than 1% of the copper supply, and it's only when the underground kicks in 3 or 4 years' time, and then takes a few years to ramp up, that you'll get the OT project making up a bit over 2% of the world's copper supply. So, despite the fact it's the largest investment into the copper space, it's not going to make a big dent into the supply position going forward.
Robert Friedland is a big name in the copper business. Much of his success has been tied to copper, and he's described the picture with copper as saying most copper mines today are like little old ladies waiting in bed to die. And what he's trying to point out here is, of course, the structural challenges for the industry with the supply from the previous commodity cycle having just peaked, and just how difficult it's going to be to catch up with the demand for copper, which Robert has been predicting is going to grow a lot quicker than most other people even think. He said, just in Escondido, which is the largest copper mine in the industry, would need to come online every 12 to 18 months just to cover the shortage that's going to appear over the next couple decades. Talk to us about the overwhelming demand that's coming forward.
Well, Robert's very colourful, and he's correct. And, declining grades and resources at the world's biggest and best mines is with us. And this means less copper each year from our existing mines. And Robert also stresses the upside to demand and describes the transformation that's already started and will occur in the auto industry in the next 20 years as one of the most significant demand transformations for copper and for more minor exotic minerals. What we have to remember is the mining industry has been focused on cost reduction and value addition over volume for the past 3 to 4 years, and the Rios and the BHPs and the others are regularly talking to their analysts about how they're cutting costs and cutting capital and cutting exploration programs. And these exploration and expansion budgets have been slashed. So turning on new supply is not going to come quickly for the industry, and it's certainly not going to, I believe, match the demand levels that will be out there. If you look at Codelco, major copper supplier for the world, it has an $18 billion 5-year investment plan just to keep it producing at its current levels, and it's had to cut that from $25 billion due to balance sheet constraints. If we look at the demand and supply balance, Colin, the largest planned supply increases are actually not coming from the established production jurisdictions. And other than Mongolia, the largest increases are actually planned to come from Peru, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, neighbouring Zambia and Russia. And these are hardly places that risk-averse investors and financiers would regard as safe havens. And at the same time, these locations also face infrastructure and power challenges. So these increases, even in these locations, will barely keep supply in line with the existing demand. And when you look at looks good quality exploration in the global exploration pipeline, there's not a lot there. So the industry is going to need to search broadly to find this new copper, and the new frontiers such as South America, places like Ecuador, Mongolia, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia and the DRC will definitely be in play despite their risk profiles. And those risk profiles bring their own issues or challenges that need to be overcome. So I think that the prospects for the copper price are pretty strong.
Cameron, much of your work has revolved in and around Mongolia, and for a lot of investors that aren't necessarily that tied into Mongolia these days, it doesn't sound like the best or safest mining jurisdiction. I know that there's political changes that happens in countries like Mongolia, and I just want to get a sense from you where we are at this point in terms of comfort level for foreign capital to be investing in that country.
Well, Colin, you make it sound like Mongolia is not a proven jurisdiction. I can tell you it has a track record, not just in copper, but it's one of the largest exporters of coal into China. Oyu Tolgoi, or OT, as it's fondly known, is a world-class mine, and it's been built. This was done in a landlocked country, in a desert region that at the time had no roads, no power, no readily available water, no air transport, It didn't have a trained workforce in country that it could draw on, and it had a mining service industry in its early stages. It got built. And Oyu Tolgoi shareholders funded that themselves at the time, but have, since construction has been completed, put in place a $4.3 billion project finance package that was supported by 21 of the world's largest banks and IFIs, and I think at the time was the largest project financing into the mining industry. So from my perspective, and I still live in Mongolia, I believe if you can do it once successfully, and Rio and Turquoise Hill have done it, I think it can be done again, and not just by those guys. The prospectivity for finding more high-grade porphyry copper resources in Mongolia, I believe, is as high as the other key regions that get the attention of the explorers. If we go back to the 1970s, there were only old mines in northern Chile. This area is now home to 15 modern mines and supplies over 10% of global copper. And the land mass and structures are deemed comparable to the southern Gobi-Devonian belt. And I believe the Mongolian political landscape, while it can be a bit confusing at times, is not anti-mining but is actually pro-development. New infrastructure and reform and progress of the mining sector really underpin the recent IMF-led financing rescue package of $5 billion, which is a very large package for an economy that currently sits at $12 to $13 billion per annum. And I think going forward, you're going to find that the Mongolian government deal very pragmatically with the business sector and those who are prepared to invest in Mongolia.
Cameron, you've started to answer my next question, which is about the prospectivity of Mongolia. And stepping back from that, many investors in the space, looking at a person like Robert Friedland, knows that the big money is made on exploring for and finding new discoveries and big new discoveries. There was a recent success story in SolGold, which of course is based in Ecuador. And since I think last March, you're looking at a 15 to 20x gain in the equity value of that stock based on their success. What do you see happening in Mongolia in terms of potentially new discoveries popping up?
Well, let me just come back to the Ecuador point and give you a little bit of context, Colin. Mongolia was once the hotspot in the world. If you go back to 2010, 11, 12, GDP growth rate's the highest in the world, from 12 to 17 to 15% during the construction period. And it was mandatory for the major copper players to be in Mongolia. From the late 2000s, everybody was here and looking for a place and looking for a partner. And Ecuador is now seen as a hotspot. Mongolia has had its problems, no doubt. But Ecuador itself has had to work hard to win back investors and be re-rated. There was the change of government to pro-development. They've put their own IMF bailout package in place. It's been agreed. The big project, the biggest project in Ecuador, I believe, is the Lundin Gold ex-Kinross project that has a capital budget of around $700 million, about a tenth the size of OT. And they basically picked that up from Kinross when, they couldn't take it forward. And that also required a stabilisation agreement with the government. I hope you can see the parallels that I'm heading towards. Yes, SolGold, a small cap, have done very well. I believe their share price has seen an 18x increase over a short period of time. And you've also got the government releasing, exploration permits to credible foreign exploration and mining companies, with the likes now of Newcrest, BHP, Fortescue, as well as credible juniors undertaking a land grab strategy. Get the land, get some offices set up, work out what to do. So if you turn back to Mongolia, the question marks regarding mining investment are really related to three factors. Firstly, the OT dispute between Rio Tinto and the government needed to be resolved, and there were a few other commercial litigations of a much smaller size that were still an irritation to investors. Point one. The second point was, the state of the economy and the government finances, and that requires a bailout package. And since 2010, there really hasn't been an issuance of exploration permits in any volumes, and there have been three issues that have put a question mark over Mongolia. If you take those three factors and you look at OT has been built. The problems between Rio Tinto, Turquoise Hill and the government have been resolved. The underground is back and big money is going into the development. With exploration permit tendering resumed, and a great illustration here is Rio Tinto picking up ground and starting drilling. And this process is expected to accelerate imminently. And the IMF package, I believe, large in scale, as I've mentioned, will ensure sensible governance and pro-business focus, and that will leverage the economy, and it'll provide visibility for the upcoming 3-year period where we don't have ending elections and we have a supermajority government in place. So they're positives that have addressed negatives. The other thing that is a big issue in Mongolia economically at the moment are the serious discussions that are going on between Russia, China and Mongolia on economic corridor projects, which are largely focused on extension to rail systems, major highways and power projects. We've not only had those things happening economically, but we've also had exploration continuing during the down period of 14, 15, 16, and the most recent success can be attributed to Erdene Resources, which is listed on the TSX, and it's had great success with its Bayan Hundi and Altan Nar gold projects, and both of these have the potential for being mines in the very near future. And the last thing I would sort of tip into the ring, Colin, is that Mongolian-focused companies are back out doing deals. They're raising money and they're getting their share prices re-rated. And just in the last 15 months, I know that a number of companies have raised just short of 50 million Canadian dollars to go into exploration in Mongolia. And Erdene have been rewarded for their successes, and their share price has been re-rated on today's basis by 5x, but it's been higher than that if you go back over the last 3 months. And they've also, on the back of that, been able to acquire a property adjacent to their flagship ore body. So I don't think it's all bad news out of Mongolia, and there's a lot of parallels. And I would like to see Mongolia in the very near future being talked in the same sort of frame as Ecuador.
Absolutely. Well, having a project like OT in country certainly sets the bar quite high. One only needs to think about a jurisdiction like Nevada, where if a mine does not reach a certain potential size, many investors will simply look for bigger mine potentials. The mantra of go big or go home certainly must be true in Mongolia. And so I'd like to kind of jump into the company Kincora and talk to you about why you find that to be such an exciting prospect in terms of just the potential prospective size if a real discovery is made.
Yeah, well, let's come back to size. I've been involved as an advisor and as a financial contributor to Kincora since early 2014. As a consequence of my involvement with Oyu Tolgoi as the president and involved in sort of exploration efforts during those 3 years, I'm a great believer in the Gobi yielding up at least another OT scale resource. From Kincora's perspective, they hold the largest land holding of any company in the South Gobi. They have a great team. Those land holdings are good quality land holdings, and they have some exciting targets which we've just started drilling. We also have Friedland's HPX vehicle on the register. That's a plus, and we've elicited new strategic shareholders in the recent capital raising. Look, Kincora is just itching to get on with the physical exploration, to do the evaluation that will come out of the phase 1 and then move to the second stage, which is funded. a program where we'll broaden the target selection and look to advancing our third, fourth, and fifth targets for drilling. And interestingly, we have an exploration permit right next to an exploration permit that Rio have just picked up. Rio are already drilling that, and strongly believe that we'll have rigs sitting on the other side of the fence to the Rio rigs, so we'll be able to keep an eye on each other.
Well, Cameron, Palisade Global was just able to invest in Kincora in the last equity financing that you mentioned, which was for about $5.9 million. And we find this to be an extremely exciting story. Just going back to having Robert Friedland as a shareholder, as you mentioned, through HPX, and thinking back to the discovery of Oyu Tolgoi, which I believe started with a market cap of around where Kincora is now, some $30 million, and at some point in that stage of discovery, the company went to a $30 billion market cap, just to give an idea of what the upside is for this kind of a discovery.
Oh, well, there's definitely upside, and I was actually at OT when the Ivanhoe share price was heading towards $30. It was a very exciting period. If you look at M&A activity, that always helps with share pricing. I think there'll be speculation on the OT Rio TRQ front going forward. It keeps guys like you busy. There's a company called McRae, which is a partner in the OT Underground. I think that'll be a potential target. We have a company called Xanadu, which is Mongolian, focused on copper and gold, and their CEO has stated recently that they have the interest of numerous industry players wanting to participate. And maybe the way for me to sum this up, Colin, is Rio is not the only one who wants to own an elephant in the Gobi. And in fact, I believe that Kincora has the prospects and the potential to do another Ivanhoe.
Excellent. Well, Cameron, we're about out of time here. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some insights on the copper market, specifically in Mongolia. I can't think of anybody who would be better versed in the space and able to share this level of knowledge with our investor base. Any final notes to add in terms of just excitement around the copper market or what you're working on at the current time?
Yeah, I just don't see a downside to the copper market, would be my first point. You've got people talking it up to huge levels, but even those who are the most conservative are talking the copper price up to levels well above its current level. So I think that's great. I think you're going to need those higher prices anyway to flush out the additional supply going forward. And those who have a track record in the copper space and who have good land holdings and who have good strategies, I think they're the guys that investors who have an interest in copper should be taking an interest in. But I think it's it's going to be hard work ahead to keep the supply coming. But watch out for those who are doing it in a good way.
Excellent. Well, Kincora Copper is KCC on the Toronto Venture Exchange for anybody interested in looking further into that. Cameron, thank you so much for coming on the show and hope to get you back soon at some point.
It's a pleasure, Colin. Cheers.
Think you understand the junior mining sector and you think that the participants in the mining sector, junior mining sector, are good people and kind people, hit the bid.
How violent that term could be? It actually could be quite violent. It could be a rip your face off uranium rally.
And the world is always going to need raw materials. It's going to need copper and gold and nickel and so forth.
Totally destabilized. Hey, Troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen?